This is the Griffin Realty Group Ask a Griffin podcast, episode number 7. How do I know what improvements to make to my home prior to selling it? Are you a buyer, seller, or real estate agent who has questions about buying or selling residential property, but you can't find an easy way to get your answers? Well, you're definitely in the right place. I'm Danny Griffin, the founder of the Griffin Realty Group and the host of the Ask a Griffin podcast. And to help you take immediate action to get started in the right direction, if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the very near future, you can take advantage of our step-by-step guides waiting for you over at griffincourses.com. That's Griffin, Griffin, courses.com. All right, let's get started. How do I know what improvements to make to my home prior to selling? Great question. And this is a really important issue. And funny, as I was about to record this podcast, I am involved in several negotiations that are renegotiations of a price for my sellers post home inspection. And in some markets, you can almost guarantee that the home inspection is going to cause somebody to come back at you. I know you can negotiate and say, well, it's as is, and I'm not going to do anything after that. Maybe. I have some coaching clients that I coach in California where there are pre-inspections. I'm going to get into that, where it really is an as-is, where-is sale. There are some methodologies to do so. But one of the things you should be cautious about if you are in a market like several of mine, especially Cape Cod, you're not necessarily in that power position where this is a have-to-be market. And that's important to understand. In a market that's secondary or vacation-like, people don't have to be there. It's a lifestyle choice. Whereas in an inner city and the jobs are all there and the market is robust, oftentimes the seller is in a stronger position. So there are market differences where this advice might be skewed one way or the other. But in general, if you want to be in full control or in better control of the sales side of your property, heed this advice. The first question that we get all the time is, well, if I am going to do anything to my house prior to sale, which improvements have the greatest return on investment? Now, in about 2 seconds, you can go Google and everybody has an opinion, and I don't know where they get the math from that this improvement will get this kind of return. Boy, I don't know. It's a pretty big blind leap of math to say that you can actually quantify that. Because remember, when somebody buys a property in total, how are you assigning individual values? You get the point, right? Almost impossible to do. However, the exercise is in fact important. I think the natural reaction in a world, and take it from a guy who's done TV before, I couldn't believe the power of staging, let alone any kind of rehab. Some of this stuff together, and in our Griffin Realty Group flow for sellers, we talk about pricing first, but we say the number 1 and 2 ways to affect pricing positively would be condition, aka reconditioning, and staging. So I definitely agree with those things as ways or those steps to improve value. But not everybody can do this stuff. Do they have the time? Do they have the money? Whatever it might be for them. But I think the idea is start from the outside in, especially if it's a single family. Now, of course, if you live in a city and you live in an apartment building, you might only have so much control over exterior. You might want to talk to management about cleaning up the street outside, cleaning up the lobby, making some noise about that. If you think that's adversely affecting value, get together with the board and make some noise. I think that's important. But let's take a single family house in our example here, where when you pull up to the curb, this concept of curb appeal is real. The very first thing that somebody does is judge your property based on the drive up. And remember, I know we live in a digital world, and I know a lot of pictures are the way that you might draw somebody to do a drive-by, but they're still coming to see your house most of the time. It's still a rare blue moon event where somebody buys a house sight unseen. If it's a tiny percentage of the market, I'm not saying that I haven't done it, because I have, but in a career that spans now over 20 years, I've only done it once, maybe a second time where it was pretty close, but it was still subject to them seeing it. So it's a rarity that they don't drive up to the property. In fact, in this digital age, it's still a regular phenomenon that people come to open houses to kick the tires and see what it's like. In fact, I was showing a property just yesterday, and somebody said, gee, the pictures are really nice. It just made the front yard look a little bit deeper. But the good news is the backyard's deeper than it looked. So people are going to get offline, and they're going to come and check the house out from the exterior. They're also going to stand there and look around the neighborhood and see what effect they feel about that. Now, there's nothing you can do about the neighbors. Maybe cut the grass for them, maybe help them clean up. I've had clients do that before if they had a neighbor that was less than enthusiastic about keeping their property up to date and clean. However, for you, start with the outside. And always start with the low to no cost sweat equity stuff first. Do your landscaping over. That doesn't mean go buy plants and trees. It just means clean it up. You can't believe how many properties that you go to where there are all sorts of broken tree branches and leaves from 2 falls ago just littering the landscape and the yard. One of the best things you can do is just do a deep clean on the exterior and just make sure it's clear if there is grass, where that begins, where it ends. Are there beds that can be planted? You don't have to do it. But think about when you pull up to a house and it's just clean. Looks great, doesn't it? Well, let's go inside before we tackle big issues. If you go inside the property as well, clean that too. And that's a little bit heavier to the extent that most people accumulate stuff, even in small places. You can't believe how much stuff shelves and small closets can hold. It's time to get rid of the stuff that you have accumulated. So the greatest ROI for the least amount of money, okay, which is typically the way you calculate ROI. If I just put some blood, sweat, and tears into this thing, cleaning it up, really the cost was just my time and my effort. And the money that you'll get in return is probably pound for pound, percentage-wise, the greatest, right? But there are other obvious things that are major items. So you want to consider all of the major items. For example, again, I'll go back to this property I was at the other day. It's easy when you have a newer property because people just look at it and say, oh, it's only 4 or 5 years old. Wonderful. But what if it's an antique? Well, I have one of those too, and the new property at the same time. And when they come to the antique, I'm able to say, well, we've represented both owners, the last 2 owners, and they've been great at the upgrades. So we have a list of the upgrades, and we quickly point to major items. Roof, sidewalling, heating system, water tank, all those things that are major functional items that have to do with safety or big out-of-pocket expenditures if the buyer were to inherit them. We address those if they've been done, okay? Now, let's stop there for a second and say, okay, here we go down this rabbit hole in this list. How do you come up with a list for your property? So let's go to the second point here. Question always comes to us, should I, as the seller, do my own home inspection? And the best practices, best advice we can give you is absolutely yes. Because that's where this kind of a do-it-yourself or fix it up or pay for it to get done list will come from. And it's the most thorough one. Because when a home inspector comes into your home on behalf of the seller or the buyer, they are adhering to extremely strict rules. God bless all the home inspectors out there because the pressure that they're under to perform an accurate home inspection, it's heavy. The liability is heavy. These guys and gals train extensively on how to try to not make mistakes, material mistakes or oversight. So they really come in to try to do the best they can, and they're following very rigid, strict guidelines on what to look for. So they're going to come out with a list that would scare anybody, would scare you. You might be looking at this saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe I lived in this house this way. So a nice inventory from a home inspector as the seller is wonderful. Now, the next question we get is, okay, well, I'm happy to do that and make the investment, but should I fix and upgrade everything on my inspection? Not necessarily so. Here's what I would say. There are multiple variables here, but I would say that time is of the essence. So if you've made a quick decision to sell or you have to sell quickly for some reason, again, I go back to what I said. Please just do the lowest cost things like cleaning outside and in first. Then when you step back from that, you have a cleaner palette where you can see what is glaringly wrong. Ask yourself, if I were the buyer, what would scare me the most? Now, presuming that you have the money and the wherewithal to get these projects finished prior to sale in a timely fashion, then I would go with the biggest ones first. And I would start with the top of the property. If there's a leak from the top down, people are petrified of water doing damage throughout, and rightfully so. I'd also look at the bottom of the property. Is there anything wrong with the foundation? the foundation or the bottom of the house, because people are worried about problems from the bottom and the top. So it's like a sandwich. Then the wrapping. Is there anything wrong with the sidewalling, the windows? So you see, this can get pretty expensive quickly. So you have the option at that moment in time to say, well, I just don't have that money. I don't have that time. Great. Here's what we would tell you. Have all of the major items that come up on your inspection as being in need of repair, have them priced out. Have them priced out first. Buy a professional. Because even if you were to go to replace the roof, you might pick a color of the roof that the buyer doesn't like. So I would say anytime you're doing this work, keep it as neutral as possible. But they might want different type of shingles. So you might want to just price this out, have it ready to go, and either do it as a credit at the closing or price it appropriately because that work needs to be done and you know it doesn't compare to the comparables. So all of that matters in your decision-making process, but price these things out, because if you don't, during negotiation, what happens is a buyer, when they do their home inspection, probably won't go get these priced out and either will walk away from the deal or they will vastly overestimate its cost. I'm in the middle of one of those too. And I know these folks are intentionally doing this, but this isn't my first negotiation. So we're having people just go through and price it for real, so that whether this buyer walks because they're just playing a game with us during negotiation, or we can come to a real agreement on the cost of this, I'm going to do the homework for the seller, because we didn't have time at the time and they didn't have the wherewithal to expend the energy. So now we'll deal with it. Okay. So that's the way that I would go through it. Do the easiest, obvious things because they don't cost a lot of money, but consider these big ones. They do matter. And let me get a little bit deeper dive into that. Bathrooms and kitchens are key. When you get into major remodelings and an older looking bathroom or kitchen, people are going to have a more negative reaction to things like that versus, say, paint on the wall. So the problem with those projects is they can be very big, very time consuming. So you have to just go lightly into that. If there is a way to improve its look with some new appliances or countertops before ripping out the whole kitchen, you could consider that. But again, you can price these things out. Now, I know there are a lot of companies out there saying, well, look, we'll lend you the money to do all this. Okay, I think that's cool. I like that. I don't think that's a bad idea as a unique selling proposition. But again, what I would say is, do you want to still go through with all that rehabilitation if you haven't done it? I still recommend getting major items that you can't do priced out, having that ready, and pricing your house appropriately versus the competitors, depending on what needs to be done. Okay? I'll let you decide on that one. Now, the last point here is, what's the best way to be prepared for this? Well, long-term planning. And this is really for a lot of you buyers who are listening to this as well, or sellers who aren't quite ready and have some time. Get your list. And on the buy side, when you have your inspection, keep your list. Think about the deal that you got because you got a good deal, because there was some deferred maintenance, and start to chip away at it over time. Because what you're doing is you're protecting the investment. I know it's home for a lot of you. I know you live there, but you're protecting someday your exit strategy. Someday you'll want to move. Someday you'll want to downsize. And even if you don't have plans on that, or you want to leave it to somebody, to charity, to your children, protect the asset by doing maintenance over time so that there isn't a day like this where you're overwhelmed with all of this. All right, let me go back to this. How do I know what improvements to make to my home prior to selling? The key points are this. Which improvements have the greatest ROI? Start with cleaning inside and out. I can't help but tell you that 1,000 times over. It is the best return on investment. However, then the next part is do your own home inspection and you'll have a list. Then you can fix the things that you can afford to fix and price out the others. But remember, best practice is long-term planning to take care of these items as you live in the property. Let me summarize this in a key point. There is no doubt you will be challenged on the details of a home inspection once completed by a buyer. The best way to be prepared is to do your own home inspection and complete any major repairs, or at least have them priced out by licensed contractors. Ultimately, the best plan is to stay on top of your home maintenance throughout the life of your ownership. All right, now remember, you can take immediate action to get started in the right direction if you need to sell or buy property right now or in the near future by using our step-by-step guides that we have waiting for you over at griffincourses.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you might listen to podcasts so that you don't miss out on any insights each time we upload an episode. We also post all of our episodes on our social media channels, so remember to turn on your notifications for Griffin Realty Group, and you won't miss the reminders. We'd also appreciate it if you would share our content with other people just like you so that they get the help they need. Now, remember, we thank you for listening, and remember that nobody's coming for you. So go get to work on your own plan for buying or selling property, and please keep asking your questions, and we'll keep the answers coming. See you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in.